In Ezekiel 12, verse 27, it says, Son of man, behold, they of the house of Israel, the vision that he seeth is for many days to come, and he prophesieth of the times that are afar off. Now, even they realized to some extent that they were even being used as a setup for what God was going to be doing throughout time. And unfortunately, most of the time they fought that. But everything is a setup. The vision that he seeth is for many days to come. He prophesieth of the times that are afar off. Everything is a setup. It needs to be translated past the prophet's day, as conditions are the same in some ways, but times and technology is different. And the prophet indeed uses their day, but conditions swiftly jump to the future conditions through their state. Because of this, this is one of the ways that there have been certain things that have been confused regarding Bible prophecy. And some of that is actually by design, in that as time goes on, God likes to show us and reveal to us things that we previously didn't know and things that previous generations didn't even know. And that's just part of what God likes to do as he brings his word to pass. And because of that, some answers that people have given in Christianity is like this one here. There is much we don't not know for certain about Ezekiel's prophecy, including the timing of these events. However, it is clear that Russia, now this is concerning Ezekiel 38, which we just made a video on, will be involved and will in fact lead the end times League of Nations to seize Israel's land. Now, we showed that as being antichrist and Satan, and whether Russia's involved is somewhat irrelevant. But the point is that he says there's much we don't know for certain about Ezekiel's prophecy. But as time goes on in the church age, we can know more and more. Now, this author wrote years ago, so maybe they didn't know then. But maybe as time goes on, we can learn and figure some things out. At least that's what the Bible teaches anyway. And so, in our book, Will the Red Sea Part Again? This is the book. We documented how Israel, just as the prophet says in Ezekiel 12:25, Son of man, behold, the vision you seeth is yet for many days. Now, as time goes on, certain commentators, as the one we just read, says, well, there's a lot we don't know. But what we're seeing is a historical and present day account of the Israeli-Arab conflict. The prophecies about Israel getting sole possession of their land are on the horizon. Preparation is occurring. Preparation was occurring back then in the prophet's time. It's also occurring now. And it's important that we understand the difference between when God is setting up a prophecy or when the actual fulfillment comes about. And God uses the old covenant conditions to set up the final generation, which is what's happening today. Israel is taking root. Israel doesn't have full control of their land yet, nor is the third temple built yet, but they are taking root in preparation for those things. That's the case that we make in this book. At the same time that Israel has struggled to take root, the history of chronic Arab opposition is continuing. Thus, the history of chronic Arab opposition continuing today is another reason why the Arabs will be punished. Along with Bloomfield, we have already stated how the prophecies will advance. Again, they'll advance to what Bloomfield calls the second crisis. The next chapter will focus on the reason why Israel is taking root. God will allow Arabs to succeed in driving all the Jews out of their land in its current condition. However, this will only fulfill what God wants to do with the mass gathering of Jews. The other 10 million Jews in the nations will go to the same areas that the Jews have gone, that the Arabs drive out of Israel. That is yet to happen as well. And we'll be apprised of all this in the next chapter. Now, we make the case in this book that though there was a scatter, and then today, for the last 100 years or so leading up to today, there has been an apparent gather from the scatter. What we're showing is that this current gather is only a setup, and it's going to lead to another scatter, and then another gather that will start the final generation, God using old covenant conditions to do that, just like he's actually still using old covenant conditions today. So there's the scatter, then the gather today, 100 years, last 100 years, but then what is a lot of the confusion in Christianity really comes down to this. There's another scatter and another gather that will take place. The problem really comes down to the scatter and the gather that is led up today is all anybody can see. But in order to be accurate with Bible prophecy, you have to be able to see things that haven't happened yet. And most commentators really don't do well with that. And I guess it would be kind of tough because it hasn't happened yet. We don't have the data yet. So what they do is they just take a look at what has happened and they just roll with that. And so if you see the scatter and the gather, then that's it. They cut it off there. But there's another scatter and another gather that will take place with Israel in their current condition. In other words, Israel will be kicked out of Israel in their current condition. And that's what very few people see. And that's why we have done a lot of works to be able to bring out when Israel, the next time Israel is going to get kicked out of their land. See, currently they've been brought back to their land and they're actually blessed and they actually have a lot of power because that was needed to set them up. Now, when the next time they get kicked out of their land, that'll be because of the curse of the old covenant, just like in history and just like when they were scattered, because they really don't have a right to be in their land unless they're all turned to God as a nation, and that's not the case right now, and that's why they'll be scattered again. Once they go, where are they going to go? Well, they're going to go back to Egypt, just like what happened before. This is Isaiah 11 and many other scriptures that we have for backups for this. And then, once they all turn to God, now they have a right to go reclaim their land. And that's the next scatter and gather. And that is not them coming under the new covenant. That is them in relating to God and the prophecies of their land under the old covenant that is going to be used to set up the new covenant. And that's why that's the start of the final generation. Then you have your third temple being built and you have prosperity like nobody's ever seen, because if you got peace in Israel, you have peace in the world, and Antichrist will be involved and he'll be able to use all that. And so that's what nobody sees. Nobody sees that the current conditions are going to bring about another scatter. And if you don't see that, oh my gosh, that's going to be, you're going to miss a lot about Bible prophecy because you don't even know how the final generation starts. Let's look at some scriptures in Ezekiel so that we can see this next scatter and gather that's going to take place separate from but connected to the scatter and gather that has already taken place, that has led us up to today. A little bit of an icebreaker before we get into some of the verses with a little different detail. But we know that these things are either directly future, or if they're in the past, they're just setting up for the future. And verse 10 is, there's really no other place that this fits other than today and in the future. Because thou hast said, these two nations and these two countries are mine, we will possess it, whereas the Lord was there. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord God, I will even do according to thine anger, and according to thine envy, which thou hast used out of thy hatred against them, and I will make myself known among them, among Israel. Why would he do that when verse 10 says that the Lord was there? We're going to see this. When I have judged thee. So 200 years ago, they couldn't have said these two nations and these two countries are mine, where we will possess it, whereas the Lord was there, because 200 years ago, the Lord wasn't there. There was no Israel. There was nothing. The land was desolate and barren. So about the last 100 years, Israel started going back. The reason why they did that, even though all the entire nation didn't turn to God, which would qualify them to have their land back, God still brought them back anyway and made them to be prosperous anyway. And he did that because he needs to set up the future prophecies that haven't happened yet, and needs to set up the time that they will turn to him and thus gain the blessings of the old covenant. Now, even though they haven't all turned to God, they currently are experiencing the blessings of the old covenant to some degree. Every time they go and blow up Iran, God says, with fury poured out, I will rule over you when you're in the nations. And God is bringing that to pass. Israel, they really have no business doing that. They have no business being one of the powers in the world. They're just a small country. They came from nothing. But this is clearly God's doing. And now the consensus among evangelicals is to see this and then think that, well, that's it. There's nothing else. Because all they really know how to do is to, again, see what has happened and then get their scriptural interpretation from that. We're not doing that. We are seeing what has happened, understanding that it's part of the process, but we're not saying that that's the final fulfillment. We're going to see, because we're following the scripture, and we're going to even go into things that haven't happened yet and be able to place them properly in time. So these two nations and these two countries, we will possess it, whereas the Lord was there. So God brings them back. And that is currently the consensus among the surrounding nations today. And they're coming against the Lord. And that's why God is able to step in, because they're not coming against Israel. They're coming against God. They want to stop God. And so I will even do according to thine anger and according to thine envy, which thou hast the hatred to them. Now, when is he going to do that? What's going to happen is God is going to kick Israel out of there. There's another scatter that's going to take place. He's going to kick them out of the current condition in Israel. We're going to see that. And then he's going to kick them out of the nations. And that's how he's going to bring them all together in the same place. Back in and around to Egypt, ships to Egypt, setting them up for the next time the Red Sea parts. And then it even says the Euphrates will dry up in 7 streams, because they'll be in, different parts of that area, all going back and reclaiming their land. We're going to see this. This is what's going to start the final generation, and this takes place prior to the rapture. The final generation is a 40-year period. The 40-year period starts when Israel turns to God and goes and takes back their land under the Old Covenant blessing, conditions, and power. So that's when he says that's the envy and the hatred that they have that's going to lead to the next scatter. And then I will make myself known to them. Well, that's when the next time they get kicked out and they get brought to the next gathering place in Egypt, then God says he's going to make himself known to them. That's where that fits. Otherwise, it doesn't really fit anywhere else. And you can't really, it just doesn't make a lot of sense if this isn't what's being in view. Now, these are only 2 verses. We're not getting all the details. We'll get other details in other verses. Sometimes the prophet just says a couple verses, skips a lot of detail. It's up to the seeker to be able to discern the prophecies and put them together. So let's look at some more prophecies concerning the same thing, same time, but just other details. Now, even though God goes through great lengths to bring them back under the Old Covenant so they can go retake their land, ultimately we still know what the outcome is going to be, because no man can keep the Old Covenant, and that's still the case as well. But there's no denying that the Old Covenant and the law is not necessary to be used to set them up for the new covenant. So even though God's going to bring them to the wilderness, bring them back into their land under the Old Covenant conditions, yes, and there'll be a time of peace and prosperity like never before the rapture happens and before the 70th week happens. Yes. Ultimately, they're going to fall away from that too, just like they did in history. Yes, but so it's like, well, I guess the argument is well, why would God do that? Well, he did it for the same reasons why he did it back then. And he's brought them through all this history to bring them to these boiling points, to get them to the point where they will accept Christ under the new covenant later and deep into the 70th week, 1/3 of Israel, whereas 2/3 will be cut off. He is a major backup for the point of this video, the time period that we're covering, which is the future scatter and then gather that's going to start the final generation, which hasn't happened yet. Now, this is also the point that we made in the book, Will the Red Sea Part Again? Verse 1, Joel 3. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. Now, this is not talking about what has happened already. It would seem that it would be talking about that, and a lot of commentators today say that what has happened already is what this is. But what has happened already is not what this is. This is the future gather that's going to be taking place in modern times. This is essentially what is actually imminent in Bible prophecy. The rapture is not imminent. This needs to happen before the rapture. Remember in Ezekiel 35, when it says, because these 2 nations and these 2 countries shall be mine, we will possess it, whereas the Lord was there. And then God is going to flip it on them, because what they did with that ambition, these two countries shall be mine, whereas the Lord was there, is they succeeded in driving Israel out of their current condition that they're in. This is what's coming, and this is what this is what the Christianity is going to have to get to. So when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, these two countries, whereas the Lord was there, this is what is imminent in Bible prophecy. I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now this is what you got to be on your toes when you're reading Bible prophecy, because now he jumps it all the way up to Armageddon, this is probably a reference to Armageddon. Now, why does he reference Armageddon? Because these two countries shall be mine, that ambition by the surrounding nations, the Lord's going to take that ambition and what they did in succeeding to drive out Israel, and he's going to take that and deal with that at the end in Armageddon. So he's going to deal with the Gentiles at the end for what they did at the beginning of the final generation. So it jumps. Prophecy will cover time just like that. It'll jump from sentence to sentence on you. But here, verse 1, when I shall bring again, that's the future gathering when they all go to Egypt and then they go back and take their land under old covenant conditions. I will also gather all nations and bring them down. He's going to punish them, because what's going to happen, now notice it says all nations. What's going to happen is Israel is going to be kicked out of their current condition in Israel, and they're going to be kicked out of the nations, including America. And they're all going to go to Egypt, and they're all going to get dealt with at one time. And the prophecies are specific. It says all. And that's when the captivity will be brought again. These two nations, these two countries. And then, sorry. Now, so it says what he'll do, and now it'll recap what the Gentiles do to them when they said these two nations will be mine. It says, whom they have scattered, verse 2, among the nations and parted my land. This is not today, and this is not the two-state solution that they talk about all the time. It could kind of include that. It's kind of interesting to think about that with this, but this is when they kick Israel out, which is eventually what everything is coming to. That's when they are going to part their land. This is essentially what's imminent in prophecy. And then it says, and they have cast lots for my people and have given a boy for a harlot and sold a girl for wine that they may drink. This is what's going to happen when they kick Israel out of their land, and when Israel starts getting kicked out of all nations. And then this is at the start of the final generation, which hasn't happened yet. And then God will punish them at the end at Armageddon for what they did at the start. Verse 4, yea, and what have you to do with me, Tyre and Zidon, coast of Palestine? Will you not recompense? And if ye recompense me swiftly and speedily, will I return your recompense? So God's going to flip it on them. Okay, that's essentially what's happening. So we can't assume that everything that has led us up to today is in these prophecies in verse 1 here and in Ezekiel 35 there, and we'll look at some more in Ezekiel. We can't assume that. We have to assume that some of this stuff has yet to happen, and the next things to happen. And this is where Christianity needs to kind of revamp their prophetic outlook and go to this kind of timing. It's important to see it and to understand exactly where it fits. Now we're going to look at Obadiah. And Obadiah is going to tell us this, give us a little other detail. Just looked at in Joel 3 and Ezekiel 35, these two nations shall be ours. They succeed and they parted their land. They took control of Israel from them, and then they sold the children into the nations. Okay, and this is all part of the scattering, which is going to succeed in being the gathering, which is going to bring all Israel together in modern times. All say if there's 15 million of them, that many together, and then they'll all turn to God and reclaim their old covenant. But in conjunction with that, you're going to have the start and the rise of the Antichrist, the little horn. He starts off as a little horn, and what does Satan and Antichrist do? Every single time they go and they get a confederacy, and that confederacy, then they use that to go against Israel and against born again Christianity. And every time that confederacy starts the way it starts in the final generation is not going to be exactly how it looks by the time we get to the end of the final generation. So the confederacy goes through some changes all the way through, but when it starts, he starts as a little horn. He starts kind of small and initially goes against Israel and succeeds in kicking Israel out of the nations. He's going to have worldwide influence and out of Israel. And what Obadiah deals with is that initial rise. The vision of Obadiah, verse 1, thus saith the Lord concerning Edom. We've heard a rumor from the Lord, an ambassador, that's the Antichrist, is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, let us go up against her in battle. That's essentially when they go against Israel, when they succeed in kicking them out, parted my land and cast lots. We just read it. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen, thou art greatly despised. That's the little horn. He starts off small. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, who saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Verse 4. Thou exalt thyself as the eagle, though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. That's what ultimately is going to happen to the Satan and Antichrist army. Now, when this initial rise happens prior to the rapture, which starts the 40-year final generation, which is what we're reading right now, it's just Antichrist. Starts off kind of small and then gains power and influence as time goes on. Once the rapture happens, Satan's kicked out of heaven, and that's when it becomes Satan and Antichrist. Here it's just an initial rise. Verse 5, if thieves come, if robbers come. Okay, verse 6, how are the things of Esau searched out? How are hidden things sought up? Now he's using Esau to bring out the mysterious rise of the Antichrist. Sometimes he uses Esau here, sometimes he uses Babylon, sometimes he uses Assyria, sometimes he uses Gog and Magog. All the men of that confederacy, verse 7, have brought thee even to the border. Now he has a confederacy here. This is what happens all the way through. He's constantly grabbing people and then taking them to go and try and stop God in his prophecies. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee. They prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound over thee. Because what's happening is they said, remember in Ezekiel 35, whereas these two nations are ours, we're going to come against them. This is God's dealing with that same ambition right here. They parted my land. And what's going to happen is that is going to prove for Antichrist and the nations, his confederacy that are springboarding and heading this, and the nations is essentially going to be flipped on them. And it's going to become as if they've been deceived, because God's going to allow that to be used to bring Israel to the point where they have nowhere to turn but to him, and then gain the power of the old covenant and go through the Red Sea again, go through the Euphrates, and go back and take their land. Now, what's going to happen when that happens is Antichrist is going to see, okay, there's nothing I can do. They're in there. But so what's going to happen is, instead of trying to beat them, which he's doing here, which succeeds in the gathering, the scatter and the gather. But once the gather happens and they go in, there's nothing he can do. Still, instead of beating them, he's going to join them. That's what's going to happen. And everybody says he's going to make a peace treaty with them. No. What he's going to do is he's going to take credit for the old covenant power that they have. So he started to come against them. He didn't succeed. So then he essentially just joined them. And that's essentially what happens when he says he's the prince of the covenant. In other words, what he's doing is in Daniel 11, it says he's the prince of the covenant. What he's doing is he's taking credit for Israel going back in, because he knows he can't fight against it. He has to take credit for it, and he has to deceive them through flattery. And that's essentially how he switches his strategy. And all this is what gets the final generation kicked off. Verse 8, shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom and understanding out of the mount of Esau? So when God counters, then Antichrist then becomes defeated, and then the Antichrist then counters. And this happens throughout the entirety of the final generation all the way up to the end. There is some success that the powers of darkness will have at different points in the final generation. And then there's elements of defeat before they're ultimately defeated. Now, verse 10, for violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off. Now, what violence? Again, you've parted my land in Joel 3. You've sold the children. You cast lots, right? So then, just like it says in Joel 3, he's going to bring them to Armageddon. This is the exact same parallel and cross-reference. And he's saying it because of what they did at the start. He will then bring the punishment for that as the final generation goes on. Verse 11, and in that day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that strangers carried away captive his forces and foreigners entered his gates, this is when Israel is being kicked out of their land that they're currently in. This is what's imminent in prophecy. They parted my land, Joel 3. We're reading Obadiah's exact same cross-reference to that. And cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou was one of them. You've cast lots, you've parted my land. Whereas there was these two nations, they shall be mine, whereas the Lord was there. You see what's happening here? It's the same thing. And the cross-references doesn't stop here and in the ones we've looked at. It's one after the other after the other. That's why you got to get the book. Will the Red Sea part again. We go through a lot of these cross-references. We'll try to do a couple more in this video, but I got to cut this video short at some point. Verse 12, but thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger. That's when Israel gets kicked out of their land. Currently, you got to see this. Neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of their distress. Now again, this isn't something that happened, a battle and when they're confederacy and they come against Israel. This isn't at the end of the final generation. This is what starts the final generation. And that's why the confederacy at this time is when the little horn comes up and plucks up three by the roots. He's got the confederacy. This is the same thing as that psalm that nobody can figure out. And this is also why eventually when Israel overcomes this, that they're dwelling safely in Ezekiel 36. But before that, they have a day of distress where they get, again, the Antichrist does have some success at the start of the final generation. Now, verse 13. And it's called the day of their distress when Israel gets kicked out of the nations and kicked out of their current condition. Verse 13. Thou shouldest not have entered the gate of thy people, of my people, in the day of their calamity. That's what's imminent in prophecy. That Israel has a day of calamity that's coming, and that pertains to the cursing of the old covenant, which is what God has to use to bring them into the blessing of the old covenant, to set up the new covenant prophecies for the end. Yeah, verse 13, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Why are they laying hands on their substance? Why are they parting their land? Because Israel is being kicked out. Verse 14, neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those that did escape, neither shouldest thou have delivered up those that did remain in the day of their distress. So clearly Israel is being kicked out. Clearly all nations are involved. Clearly the Antichrist and his rise is being involved. And this is clearly happening prior to the 70th week. This is a setup prophecy. this needs to be understood. I just can't stress that enough. I don't really know how else to say it, but we got to keep going here. Verse 15, the day of the Lord is near upon all heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. The day of the Lord is near upon all heathen. It just gives us a timing indicator right here. So you know the day of the Lord is future. It's near. The day of the Lord is near. So these are the events that lead us up to the start of the final generation. Now, when it says day of the Lord, you always got to look at the context and try and figure out what part of the day of the Lord it's dealing with. Well, we're not in the 70th week here. We're at the initial rise of the Antichrist. We're at the start. Everything happens in the Antichrist's lifetime. He has to have a starting point. And so the day of the Lord is near upon all heathen is the events that we're dealing with right now. These events lead us up to the start of the final generation. This is a massive timing indicator that confirms everything that we're saying. They're going to get kicked out of their land. It's going to be led by Antichrist and his initial confederacy. They're going to all go by ships to Egypt and into that area. They're going to turn to God. They're going to then probably the Ark of the Covenant very well could show up. It's not necessarily going to be a Moses figure. We don't necessarily see that. It's just going to be God doing it, and he's going to bring them over the Red Sea, and they're going to go back and they're going to reclaim their land. And verse, and that's what I think Obadiah goes into a little bit even now with the closing verses. Oh, and then that's when the third temple is going to get built, and that'll be a time of peace and safety. It all fits. And this is all prior to the pre-trib rapture. Verse 16. So shall all the heathen drink continually, yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, they shall be as they had not been. But upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. See, now, when they turn to God under the old covenant, just like they used to, this verse is the same. Now, when they turn under God in the old covenant, they're ultimately, because no man can keep the old covenant, and that doesn't change, but it still is necessarily to set up. So they're going to fall away eventually, but until they do that, they'll be right with God. And then it says they'll possess their possessions. Now, why does it say they'll possess their possessions? Because they just got kicked out, and it says Esau was in there, and they were parting the land, and they were casting lots. They were just there with their possessions, but now Israel goes back in, and now they're possessing their possessions. Do you see how this fits together? And now this is the details that we get here. Other prophecies give you other details, but you have to just know that these things haven't happened yet. You have to know that these are the next things to happen. And just because they haven't happened yet doesn't mean that they won't happen. And so we don't always have to go through everything that has led us up to today to try and get our interpretation. So I'm going to cut this video short. Was going to go into Ezekiel 36 and 37, which also shows what has led us up to today, and then how what has led us to today corresponds and hands off the scatter and gather that is yet to happen, that needs to happen to start the final generation. I'm not going to go into it, but I actually did a video on this 3 years ago, and it's on this channel, and it's called the Zionist Regathering Bloomfield Prophecy. You can check it out on this channel. But real quick, shoot for Ezekiel 36, shoot forth your branches. That's what takes us up to today, because you can't go from nothing to just bringing every Jew in the world back immediately and then fulfilling the prophecies. So shoot forth your branches, which brings us up to today, is necessary for my people are at hand to come, it says, Ezekiel 36. So my people are at hand to come, that has yet to happen. Shoot forth your branches, that needed to happen before my people are at hand to come. So my people are at hand to come, that's the next thing to happen. And that is the scatter and then the gather. And then they come in. And that's when Antichrist is involved. And so I'm not going to show that here, but I've already done another video on it. You can check that out. You can get the book, Will the Red Sea Part Again, which actually I'm revising, but you could still get it because it's got good information in there. And we're going to cut this video out. God bless you.